When Miss Eleanor settled onto her usual park bench, she thought it would be just another quiet afternoon feeding the birds. But then she noticed a young girl, Lily, nervously walking towards her, glancing over her shoulder as if she were being followed. In that moment, as their eyes met, Miss Eleanor saw the fear and desperation in Lily's face, a look that demanded immediate action. Just then, Miss Eleanor spotted a stranger watching them closely, his intentions unclear but unmistakably dangerous. She knew she had to protect this child at all costs. Before we get into this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and if you find yourself drawn into this emotional journey. Don't forget to subscribe. The sun peeked through the wispy clouds, casting a warm glow over Oakwood Park. As the morning dew evaporated from the grass, a familiar figure made her way along the winding path. Miss Eleanor, a petite woman in her early 70s, walked with a slight shuffle. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she wore a comfortable cardigan and carried a well-worn canvas bag, its contents rustling with each step. Approaching her favorite bench, Miss Eleanor's eyes crinkled with a smile. The wooden seat, weathered by countless seasons, sat beneath a sprawling oak tree. She lowered herself onto it with a contented sigh, feeling the familiar grooves beneath her fingertips. "Good morning, my little friends," she said, reaching into her bag. A flock of pigeons, as if on cue, began to gather at her feet. Miss Eleanor pulled out a small paper bag filled with bird seed and carefully opened it. The scent of the seeds wafted through the air, drawing even more birds to her side. With a gentle flick of her wrist, she scattered a handful of seeds onto the ground. The pigeons cooed and pecked, their feathers shimmering in the morning light. Miss Eleanor watched them with a warm, nostalgic smile that hinted at memories from long ago. "There you go," she murmured, tossing another handful. "Plenty for everyone." As she fed the birds, Miss Eleanor's mind wandered to a time when her life was filled with noise and laughter. She could almost hear the echoes of her children's voices, the pitter-patter of little feet running through her house. But those days were long gone now. Her children had grown up and moved away, starting families of their own in distant cities. What was once a bustling household full of love and activity had slowly faded into quiet solitude. The park had become her refuge, a place where she could feel connected to the world around her, even if only for a little while each day. Miss Eleanor's gaze drifted to a group of children playing on the nearby playground. Their shrieks of joy and peals of laughter carried across the park, bringing a faint smile to her face. A little girl with pigtails zoomed down the slide, her arms raised in triumph as she landed. A boy chased his friend around the monkey bars, their faces flushed with excitement. "Oh, to be young again," Miss Eleanor chuckled to herself, tossing more seeds to the pigeons. She found solace in watching the children play, their innocence and joy a balm for her lonely heart. It reminded her of the days when her own children were small, when the world seemed full of endless possibilities. As she observed the playground, Miss Eleanor's thoughts drifted to her family. She wondered what her grandchildren might be doing at that very moment. Would they be playing in a park like this one? Would they be laughing and running just like these children? "I bet little Tommy would love that slide," she mused, picturing her youngest grandson. "And Sarah would be all over those monkey bars." A twinge of sadness tugged at her heart. Miss Eleanor had only met her grandchildren a handful of times during family gatherings or holiday visits. The distance made it difficult to form the close bond she had always dreamed of having with them. She reached in her bag and pulled out a small photo album, flipping through the pages. She traced her finger over the smiling faces of her family. There was her daughter's wedding day, her son's college graduation, and a few precious snapshots of her grandchildren as babies. "Look how they've grown," she whispered to herself, a mixture of pride and longing in her voice. She imagined what it would be like to have them nearby, to be able to bake cookies together or read them bedtime stories. Her gentle demeanor hid a deep sense of longing for that connection. Miss Eleanor closed the album and tucked it back into her bag. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air. The park had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could find peace amid her solitude. But today, the ache of loneliness felt particularly sharp. As the morning wore on, Miss Eleanor continued to feed the pigeons and watched the world go by. She nodded politely to the joggers and dog walkers who passed her bench, exchanging brief pleasantries. A young mother pushing a stroller smiled at her, and Miss Eleanor felt a pang of envy mixed with joy. "What a beautiful baby!" she called out as they passed. The mother beamed with pride, pausing to let Miss Eleanor admire the sleeping infant. For a moment, she could almost imagine it was her own grandchild. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the bustling morning crowd began to thin. Families packed up their picnic baskets, and the playground slowly emptied. Miss Eleanor watched as the park transformed around her, the lively atmosphere giving way to a quieter, more subdued energy. She glanced at her watch, surprised to see how much time had passed. My, where did the morning go?" she murmured to herself. The bag of bird seed was nearly empty now, and most of the pigeons had wandered off in search of new adventures. She glanced around, taking in the now deserted landscape. The colorful playground equipment stood abandoned, swings swaying gently in the breeze, as if mourning the absence of eager children. Even the usual crowd of evening joggers and dog walkers seemed to have vanished, leaving Miss Eleanor feeling oddly exposed. "My goodness," she murmured to herself. "I've never seen the park this empty before." The silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant city sounds. Miss Eleanor found herself straining to hear any sign of life, the unusual quiet making her more aware of her surroundings than ever before. It was then that she spotted her, a small figure entering the park from the eastern gate. At first, Miss Eleanor thought it might be a lost child looking for their parents, but as the girl drew closer, it became clear that something was amiss. The child, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, walked with a nervous energy that seemed out of place in the tranquil setting. Her clothes were slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running or hiding. Her face, framed by messy brown pigtails, was etched with anxiety. Her eyes darted back and forth as she made her way deeper into the park. Miss Eleanor leaned forward on her bench, her brow furrowed with concern. "Hello there, dear," she called out gently, not wanting to startle the child. "Are you all right?" The girl's head snapped up at the sound of Miss Eleanor's voice, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. For a moment, she seemed to consider approaching the kindly older woman, but then something made her hesitate. Miss Eleanor watched as the girl glanced nervously over her shoulder, her small body tensing as if ready to bolt at any moment. It was clear she was looking for something or someone behind her, and the thought sent a chill through Miss Eleanor's heart. "It's okay," Miss Eleanor said softly, trying to sound reassuring. "You're safe here. Can you tell me what's wrong?" But the girl didn't respond. Instead, she continued to scan the area behind her, her eyes growing wider with each passing second. The urgency in her movements was palpable, adding to the growing sense of unease that had settled over the park. Miss Eleanor was about to stand up and approach the child when something caught her eye at the edge of the park. Partially obscured by a cluster of trees stood a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to blend into the shadows. But it wasn't his appearance that made Miss Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. It was the intensity of his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the young girl. The man's posture was rigid, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unwind. There was something undeniably off about him, something that made Miss Eleanor's instincts scream danger. She had lived long enough to trust her gut feelings, and right now, every fiber of her being was telling her that this man meant harm. As Miss Eleanor watched, the stranger's hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers brushing against something concealed within. With growing horror, she realized she could make out the faint outline of what appeared to be a knife. The realization sent a jolt of fear through her, making her heart race. The girl, seemingly unaware of Miss Eleanor's discovery, continued to move deeper into the park, her path erratic, as if she was trying to lose someone who might be following her. With each step, she drew closer to Miss Eleanor's bench, and the older woman could now see the tears glistening in the child's eyes. Miss Eleanor's mind raced, trying to decide what to do. Should she call out to the girl again, try to warn her about the man? Or would that only serve to alert the stranger and potentially escalate the situation? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, knowing that the wrong choice could have dire consequences. Before she could come to a decision, the girl suddenly locked eyes with her. In that moment, something passed between them. A silent understanding, a desperate plea for help. Without warning, the child changed course, making a beeline for Miss Eleanor's bench. As she approached, Miss Eleanor could see the fear etched into every line of the girl's face. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, and her hands trembled at her sides. When she finally reached the bench, she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please," she breathed, her words tinged with desperation. "Please pretend that you know me." The urgency in the girl's voice sent a surge of protective instinct through Miss Eleanor. Without missing a beat, she opened her arms wide, her face breaking into a warm, welcoming smile. "Oh, sweetheart," she exclaimed loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "It's so good to see you. Come here and give your grandma a big hug." As she pulled the girl into a tight embrace, Miss Eleanor's eyes darted to the edge of the park, where she had last seen the stranger. He was still there, his intense gaze now fixed on their interaction. Miss Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to maintain her cheerful facade. "I've missed you so much," she continued, her voice full of manufactured joy. "How are your parents and school? You must tell me everything." As she spoke, Miss Eleanor's mind was racing, on the outside appearing calm and collected. Every inch the doting grandmother, but internally, she was frantically strategizing, trying to figure out the best way to keep this child safe. She discreetly scanned the area, looking for possible exits or potential witnesses. The park, which had seemed so peaceful just moments ago, now felt like a trap. The few remaining people were too far away to call for help without alerting the suspicious man. The main gate was a good distance away, and she wasn't sure if her old legs could outrun a potential pursuer. All the while, she kept up a stream of cheerful chatter, asking the girl about imaginary friends and family members, creating an illusion of familiarity. "And how is your little brother, Tommy? Still causing trouble, I bet." The girl, catching on quickly, nodded and mumbled responses, playing along with the charade. But as they hugged, she leaned in close to Miss Eleanor's ear, her voice shaking as she whispered, "He has a knife. He's been following me. I didn't know where else to go." The words sent ice through Miss Eleanor's veins, confirming her suspicions. She tightened her grip on the girl ever so slightly, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. In that moment, she made a silent vow to do whatever it took to keep this child safe. "It's all right, dear," she murmured, her voice low and soothing. "I'm here now. You're safe with me." Miss Eleanor then suggested brightly, "Why don't we sit down?" guiding the girl to the bench. "You can tell me all about your day at school." As they sat, Miss Eleanor positioned herself between the girl and the direction of the stranger. She kept her movements casual, as if she were simply getting comfortable, but her eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. "Now then," she said in a whisper, "why don't you start by telling me your name, sweetheart? My old memory isn't what it used to be." The girl, still trembling, slightly managed a small smile. "I'm Lily," she said softly. "Lily," Miss Eleanor repeated as if savoring the name. "What a beautiful name for a beautiful girl. And how old are you now, Lily?" "8," Lily replied, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "My, how you've grown," Miss Eleanor exclaimed, her tone convincingly surprised. She leaned in as if sharing a secret. "You know, when I was 8, I had the most wonderful adventure in a park just like this one. Would you like to hear about it?" Lily nodded eagerly, seeming to relax slightly in the face of Miss Eleanor's calm demeanor. As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Oakwood Park, Miss Eleanor continued her impromptu performance, her voice steady and warm as she chatted with Lily. To any casual observer, they might have appeared to be a grandmother and granddaughter catching up after a long separation. But beneath Miss Eleanor's calm exterior, her senses were on high alert. Her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings as the late afternoon grew quiet, the sounds of the park fading with the setting sun. Lily leaned in closer, completely focused on Miss Eleanor's stories, which allowed her time to gauge the stranger's movements. Then, without warning, the stranger's body tensed again, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You think you can just take her?" he growled. "You think this is a game?" Miss Eleanor squeezed Lily's hand tightly. "I don't know who you are or what you want," she said firmly, "but I won't let you near her. You need to leave." The man laughed darkly, his voice low and threatening. "Leave? You don't know what you're getting into, old lady." Before Miss Eleanor could respond, another figure appeared at the edge of the park. It was a police officer, his uniform crisp and authoritative. "Everything okay here?" he called out, approaching quickly. Miss Eleanor glanced at the officer, relief washing over her. "Yes, officer," she said, never taking her eyes off the stranger. "This man is causing trouble." The man turned on his heel, looking ready to bolt, but in that moment, the officer moved in front of him, blocking his escape. "Sir, why don't you come with me?" the officer said, his tone calm but firm. "I don't have to do anything," the man growled, his defiance clearly evident, but the officer remained unfazed. "You can either cooperate or we'll make it difficult for you." At that moment, 3 more officers arrived, surrounding the man, making it impossible for him to escape. Lily was watching in wide-eyed silence, her little hand still clamped firmly in Miss Eleanor's. "You see, that's how it works," Miss Eleanor said softly to Lily, her heart racing. "You call for help when you need it, and when the time comes, you stand together." With the police now in control, the man gradually went from defiant to desperate, his bravado failing him. "Wait, I was just talking to her," he shouted, panic rising in pitch. But the officers were having none of it. They moved to detain him, but he resisted, trying to break free. "Don't let him hurt me, Grandma," Lily cried, fear creeping back into her voice. But Miss Eleanor tightened her grip on her, her voice steady. "You're safe," she said, her heart swelling with intensity. "None of this is your fault. I have you, and you are safe now." The officers moved decisively, finally pinning the man to the ground. Miss Eleanor's heart raced, exhilaration and relief coursing through her. She looked down at Lily, whose eyes were wide with wonder, and they shared a moment of understanding. "You are so brave, Lily," Miss Eleanor said, pulling the young girl close as they watched the officers. Eventually, with the suspect secured, one of the officers turned to Miss Eleanor and Lily, a warm smile breaking the tension. "Both of you did a good job today." Miss Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the police presence that had transformed a fearful situation into one of safety. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Miss Eleanor and Lily both took a deep breath, the beach of emotions sweeping over them. "Can we go get ice cream now?" Lily asked, her voice timid but hopeful. With a chuckle, Miss Eleanor leaned closer. "Of course, my little friend. It's a beautiful way to celebrate bravery, don't you think?" Lily's face lit up. "Yes. Can we tell my parents to come too?" "Yes," Miss Eleanor confirmed, her heart soaring at the prospect of not just sharing ice cream, but strengthening the bonds they had begun to form through this chaotic afternoon. As they walked toward the park exit, side by side, Miss Eleanor felt a warmth spreading through her. The vulnerability that had cast a long shadow in her life began to fade, replaced by a newfound connection. A feeling that she had taken an essential step toward building not just a relationship with Lily, but a legacy of love and courage that would ripple through generations. Today had begun as a quiet afternoon at the park, but as she walked beside this brave little girl, Miss Eleanor could feel it transforming into something vibrant and deeply meaningful. "You were so brave today," Miss Eleanor said again, leaning down to meet Lily's knowing gaze. "And you know what? So was I." The girl smiled, unguarded once more. "I want to keep being brave," Lily declared, her small voice crystal clear. The words rang true in Miss Eleanor's heart, and she knew in that moment that together, they would always find ways to be brave, both for each other and for the moments that would continue to shape the lives they touched.